Hello, my name is Michael Swinford, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the Veteran's Voice. We have a very special guest with us today, a man that served in Vietnam and was involved in some secret operations, and he has a very interesting story to tell of intrigue and drama, and we'll be back to talk to him in just a few minutes. Welcome back to the Veteran's Voice. I'm very happy to have a friend here today that I've known for probably 50 years, and yet I found out I don't know a whole lot about him either, which might be a good thing. But Terry McIntosh is with us, and we go back a long way in many ways. In some ways we don't go back at all. So we're going to be talking to you today and asking you some questions about your life and your service to your country and the aftermath. So tell us a little bit, Terry, about where you grew up and what your childhood was like.
Well, okay, first of all, Michael, I want to say thank you for having me here today, and certainly appreciate all that you're doing with the Veteran's Voice. As far as me personally, well, I'm just a local Paducah boy, having been born in McCracken County and raised in Graves County. Attended Wingo High School. Life was pretty average for people of my generation, and I found myself to be a bit rebellious child and dropped out of high school early. I didn't like discipline too well and preferred flying by my pants in most cases, so struck out early on my own, and that eventually put me in a place where I had to make a choice about where I wanted to go in the future. And of course the war in Vietnam was going on, and to a 17-year-old kid, it seemed like the right thing to do, was to serve the country and see what that might develop into. So I enlisted in the Army in 1967 with a friend of mine that you know, Thomas Powell from Mayfield, Kentucky. He and I enlisted on the buddy plan together, which meant that we were supposed to complete all of our training together. We were separated first day, and I never saw him again until years after both of us had completed our military service. So much for the buddy plan. But I had enlisted in 1967, took my basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, to Fort Lewis, Washington for AIT, back to Fort Benning for Airborne Jump School because I had an interest in flying. But I didn't have the education to back that up, so
Yeah, that's where they jump out of good airplanes, right? For no reason at all.
Yeah, we didn't jump out of bad ones, just good ones. Yeah. And that was the closest I could get to actually, flying itself by jumping out of them. So I volunteered for that program and completed that airborne basic training in 1967.
Well, being you're here today, I would assume that all your jumps were successful.
Oh, they were, yes.
Well, that's good.
Yes, but I will tell you that the first one was you would think that would be the scariest jump. For me personally, see, I'm afraid of heights. So it was a real challenge for me to do this. So the first jump turned out to be the best jump, because I didn't really know what to expect on that first jump, but thereafter I knew what to expect, so I was always a bit apprehensive.
Well, the only thing I ever jumped out of was a helicopter to a ship, and that left me marked for life, so I can't imagine what you were doing. It makes no sense to me why anybody would jump out of a plane, but I guess there are reasons. So you went to a specialized school to learn how to do all this jumping and whatnot?
Well, of course, that was just your standard airborne training, that every paratrooper undergoes.
Were you considered infantry or?
Infantry
airborne?
was my original MOS, yes, 11 Bravo. And from there I was assigned to an elite unit in Germany and this was with the 17th Infantry Long Range Recon Patrol Unit, an airborne unit, a LRP unit.
Yeah.
And it was there that I went through extensive training, you know, working behind enemy lines.
Now, what does LRP mean for the people that don't know?
Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol. LRP is just a...
Don't the Marines also have a similar program?
Of course. I think every branch of the service has its own representation of that, yeah. But this was the U.S. Army version. And that unit eventually became the 75th Rangers today, which I later served with too after Vietnam. But during the time in Germany, that's where I underwent extensive training, was also skilled in radio communications. And
so would you call yourself kind of an overachiever? You had a desire to learn as much as you could learn?
I wouldn't say that would be right to say that I was an overachiever. It wasn't really my, I was just rolling with the flow, Michael. Yeah. Just like with this conversation we're having, we're just rolling with it. And that's how I was with it then. I was just rolling with it. And as the assignments came my way, of course, you know, as a military man, you have no option except to, you know, accept the challenge. So.
Well, you don't accept what they tell you, where you're going or what you're going to be doing, because it's going to change tomorrow anyway.
Well, that's true.
When did you first even think about Vietnam? Were you in the service at that time, or?
Well, yeah. I didn't. Of course, you know, like I said, when I enlisted initially, I knew I was aware of the Vietnam War going on. I was not aware of all of the political issues and the intricate workings of it all. To me, I was a 17-year-old young man, and it was just a war going on somewhere, and Americans were dying, and so, you know, that is what got my attention. But after getting, you know, into the service and acclimated to the military lifestyle and the training that I was receiving, I knew that there would be a strong possibility that I would go to Vietnam, and I actually wanted to go.
Well, I did too. My first duty station, they posted a notice says, if you want to go to Vietnam, sign here. In my feeble mind, I thought, well, that'd be good. I'll volunteer and I'll get a cushy job, and maybe I'll get on one of them big old ships out there and I'll fire them rockets and stuff over on land. And come to find out that was the worst mistake I ever made. Because when I got off the plane, he said, you go get your greens and an M16 and a 45 automatic. And I asked him very stupidly, I said, what are greens? But I guess you know what they are also.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Well, you know, from a young man's perspective like mine was, the idea of going into combat, facing the enemy, you know, the ultimate man against man challenge, there seems to be, like the movies might portray, some sort of romantic notion about it or something extra special. But when you get right down to it, that's not true at all. It's a dirty, dirty job, you know. But at that age and being inexperienced, it all was very appealing.
Well, I didn't land in Vietnam with any preconditions. I said, whatever they throw at me, I'll deal with, and I don't know what they're going to throw at me. I learned quickly, but I remember the first firefight, I was scared to death.
Sure.
This was something so foreign to a simple person from Massac County. No one had ever shot at me before that I know of, and I'd never shot at anyone before. And you go through this whole litany of moral issues. Should I shoot back? Absolutely. You have to make these decisions, and if you think too long, you're going to get killed. That's right. So it was a whole environmental change that made you something that you'd never been before, and that would serve you later in your life, would it not?
That's true. And the issue you bring up is one, you know, that's very important. I think that has had a long-term effect on a lot of Vietnam veterans who were drafted directly out of high school. And they took their basic training, and then they were sent to Vietnam, directly to Vietnam. And they were not emotionally prepared to really make those kinds of decisions at that time. And because of being thrust into that sort of a violent situation, and many times in violation of their own moral code in order just to survive, you know, that has had a long-term adverse effect on many of our veterans today, where others, maybe perhaps like myself, with more extensive training, and was more prepared actually whenever I was engaged in combat.
Well, they told us, they said, don't shoot till somebody shoots at you. Well, one person's in a crowd of 50 shooting at you, and you don't know where it's coming from, who it is. You can't see the enemy. You know they're there, but you can't find them. And the same people that work for you in the daytime will come back and mark where the rockets hit overnight.
Yeah.
And it takes you out of that growing up in western Kentucky element to a land and people that you had never seen before. You had no clue their heritage. You didn't understand the people at all, nor did they really understand you, but I think they grasped us quicker than we grasped them.
I think you're right.
They understand things because they've been fighting for so long.
Right. Well, it was lifestyle for them.
Yeah.
For us, it was all brand new.
Generations and generations of people, and they learned how to fight.
Yeah.
They were actually taught how to win.
Well, they were clever enemies.
Yes, they were, and I don't know that the American soldiers and sailors were actually taught how to win. They were taught how to defend, they were taught how to bomb and whatnot, but as far as having a winning strategy going into Vietnam, I don't believe there ever really was one.
Well, it doesn't appear to have been in retrospect, and of course you are aware of the strategy of taking territory at the cost of many lives and then pulling out and letting the enemy retake it and going back and taking that again. That's a way of drawing them out of their hiding and being able to engage them, but that's not a strategy that I would personally employ or expect anyone under my command to do.
I don't think
you take
anybody,
it and you keep it.
Yeah, really. I
Yeah.
don't think anybody at that time could understand the rationale behind that. It made no sense. It's something you do as a child. You take the sand hill and here comes Bobby Joe, he's going to take it back.
Right.
We understood that. But when you're losing 450 men going up Hamburger Hill, and then you say, here, the Viet Cong, Vietnamese, take it, we'll be back after a while and get it back. That sticks with a lot of people today.
Oh yeah, when American lives are at stake, you've got to play for keeps.
Yeah. And I think that's something maybe we're missing today is playing for keeps. We're playing to an end of a certain term of time, but we're not really there to win because we could go to Iraq and Iran and we could have that over with in a couple of weeks.
Well, if you'll permit me to express an opinion about
Of
that.
course.
I mean, you're going to have issues whenever civilians are making the military decisions. Now, not everyone maybe understands that the military is an extension of the civilian government.
Right.
It's the civilian government who makes all of these decisions, and the military has to follow that order. When it comes to handling the enemy, fighting the enemy, it should be left up to military men with experience and competent records to make those recommendations, and the civilian government should act upon those instead of the other way around, where a civilian government may possibly many times look at things from through a completely different lens, being politically correct, or what will this nation over here think about that, or how will it affect me in the voting booths, So that's the wrong approach to handling any crisis that would pose a threat to American lives.
I can remember being in a guard town in Vietnam, and we had a magazine, but we could not put a shell in the chamber unless there was incoming fire.
Wow.
Now, what kind of rationale is that? But it was a rather large area, and there was plenty of protection around, so they figured, well, if they fire at you, then go ahead and lock and load and go.
Yeah.
But when a person gets those kind of commands or orders, he's pretty much left to whatever's coming.
Yes, that's true.
And a lot of people died because of commanders and issuing orders that kids could do.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost a lot of people, and I think that bothers me more than anything.
Well, there's decisions made in the heat of combat that are sometimes wrong.
Right.
And those are things that are understandable. But whenever it's a policy in advance of it that places the American soldier in harm's way, it's just absolutely incredible.
Let me ask you a question that I've asked other guests. Do you think that Vietnam was a spiritual war?
Well, I'm sure that there's an aspect of that because, from my personal belief in God and my faith tells me that the spiritual aspect and the physical realms are interplaying. So in some way, I'm sure, but maybe you can share more of what you're thinking.
Well, as I research Vietnam, of course, I've been back 5 times since the war ended, and I've had a chance to interview people. The Buddhist people had no power to speak of.
True.
They had the numbers and people, and the Catholic people, they had all the power essentially, and there was a few of them in number. So the head of the Catholic Church in Vietnam was a good friend of Cardinal Cushing in New York. Cardinal Cushing being a good friend of John Kennedy. John Kennedy, you can take it a step further. Now that's just, I feel like that if an evil entity was to devise something that would ultimately touch every American, Vietnam would have done that. Because if you look before Vietnam and after Vietnam, everything changed after Vietnam. Our values, our families, color TV, pot, free love, the whole bit. All that changed after Vietnam. And I'm not so sure that wasn't the reason that America turned a corner. And it wasn't a good corner, but we turned it nonetheless. And I believe Vietnam was the catalyst for that to happen. So that's my take on that.
Well, I've never heard it expressed that way, but I can see, the validity of it. The 60s were, like they call them, the turbulent 60s. There were a lot of changes going on. The Vietnam War, of course, in progress. The country divided over it, but the moral standards in our country were beginning to really alter and change at that same time. So I can see a correlation there, yeah.
Well, if you were that evil entity and you wanted to change America, it would be most difficult to find something that would do all the changing.
Oh, of course.
Little things change automatically, whether we like it or not. But for a massive upheaval of social norms, and everything went from this to that. We took down the swings on our porches because we didn't want to sit out and talk anymore, and we isolated ourselves. And then, of course, technology came along and further isolated us. People don't talk anymore. For us to sit here and talk is kind of amazing in a way, because all that time yesterday, people said things, but they didn't talk. It's like, hi, how you doing? Good for you, thank you. Well, those aren't real conversations. Those are just adjectives used to describe feelings.
True, true.
But we've lost it, and we're losing them more and more every day.
That's all very true. But on the lighter side, now we can both get out our phone now and text each other.
Not me, they won't allow me to have one. I'm hoping to get a jitterbug for Christmas. I don't know, I'm kind of iffy on that.
Well, good luck on that.
But people in business have a lot going on. They need a phone, I understand that.
Yeah.
But I was reminded of a turkey dinner some years ago, and we're sitting at the table, and there were 6 people, and they all had their phones out talking to each other, and they're that close across the table.
Wow, okay.
But that gives you kind of...
It's the new culture.
You've never done anything like that.
Oh, no, I have a phone, of course.
Of course.
But it's not for those purposes.
Yeah.
It's for emergency contact, basically. I'll leave home and forget the phone 2/3 of the time, so I'm still from the old generation.
Well, taking it spirituality and war a step further, at one time, the Bible said, thou shalt not kill. Plain and simple, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
It didn't say this or that or this or that. It said, thou shalt not kill. And now they have changed it to murder, which is a different connotation. But did they not change the word to appease the masses as opposed to changing something that said don't change?
Well, I think the real problem there occurred in translation, actually, Michael. The actual Hebrew word for kill is murder. So if it had been translated, thou shalt not murder, that would have been much more clear then.
Yeah.
I was raised in a godly Christian home who understood "do not kill" to mean "do not kill." And so, you know, as I was confronted with this issue, I mean, after all of my romanticizing about war and then getting there and them handing me the real stuff and saying, you know, you're going to have to kill people or die, like so many others, I was confronted with that issue you're talking about. Wow, I'm taught not to kill, so what am I supposed to do? I didn't realize it was do not murder. So it was a very present problem for me to have to resolve.
Well, you have to make these moral decisions at the moment. You can't say, well, let me think about it, I'll get back to you tomorrow.
Right. No, it was...
You know, you have to pull the trigger or die.
That's right.
And a lot of people feel guilty today because of who they killed or how they killed them.
Yeah.
You know, there were situations in Vietnam where the enemy was thousands and they just dug out holes in the ground and pushed the dirt over it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Vietnamese are trying now to find those people. We talk about our, you know, 2,500 missing in action. The Vietnamese government say they have 300,000 that are missing.
Yeah.
And a mother's tears in Vietnam are just like the mother's tears here in America,
Of course.
you know.
Yeah.
And to them, the American war is over. But I don't know if the Vietnam War will ever be over until there is peace in the valley someday.
Yeah.
But so after you got into battle and with all your training and everything, explain to me how a certain mission went that you participated in.
Okay, you're referring to Project Gamma.
Yes.
Gamma, I think, yeah. Well, for the sake of clarity, whenever I came down on orders for Vietnam, I was called for Special Forces, which better known as the Green Berets. And at that time of the Vietnam era, that was the most recognized elite Army outfit that there was. And Special Forces worked across the nation in Vietnam in a number of different A camps, and then they had the support teams. Special Forces had lost a lot of personnel during the Tet Offensive. It was a volunteer-only organization with high entrance standards, minimum age 21, plus you had to be intelligent, you know, to qualify.
And you got into that?
Well, yes, what? Let me explain how that happened.
Okay, I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, because they were short on personnel, they had to look outside of their own ranks to find people who were qualified. And so they temporarily lowered the age limit to 18. I was 18 years old, and my MOS was a critical skill need, plus the, you know, the 11
And
Bravo.
what is your MOS now?
It was radio communications.
And what does the MOS stand for?
Military occupational skill.
Okay.
So my MOS, my primary had been changed from 11 Bravo to radio communications. Of course, I was cross-trained in the, you know, 11 Bravo and light weapons is what we're talking about. So anyway, I fit the need that they had. And so whenever I was sent to Vietnam, it was with Special Forces. Now, when the order came down, no one was more surprised than I, because I had not volunteered for Special Forces, and perhaps I could have gotten out of it, I don't know. But I wanted, you know, I was proud to accept that assignment, so I ended up in Vietnam with the Green Berets. And at the time of 1968, you know, a full-fledged member of the Green Berets. And since then, they have new entrance requirements and things that today I might not qualify for, but per 1968, you know, it was full.
Well, they were pretty desperate for personnel in '68.
They were, yeah. And they took me as an 18-year-old, and the average age of these Green Beret soldier in Vietnam was 30 to 35. Now, to an 18-year-old, that's, you know, you're kind of an old man at 35. So I was the young kid on the block. But once I had gotten there, I spent the first few months in a C support team, and then out to a B team, which supported the A teams. And from there, this is where I first began to meet the Vietnamese people, was in the B team in Ma Qua, and came under fire, you know, with nightly mortar attacks and things of that nature. my first engagement with the enemy was on a field assignment there in the B team as well. But soon afterwards, after being in the country 6 months, I was assigned to a Special Forces A team at the Cambodian border. I mean, you could throw a rock over, the border there. And our team hosted a top secret intelligence gathering information called Project Gamma. And if any of your viewers have any interest in that, all you have to do is research Project Gamma on Google and you can pull up, the history of that. But the goal, of course, was to maintain an eye on the VC buildup in Cambodia. At one of our main targets was an area called Parrot's Beak, which I'm not sure, maybe 20 miles from where we were at inside Cambodia. And so the Project Gamma team provided 3 men on our team who worked under aliases. And one of those men was Captain Robert Marasco. Now that's his real name. His alias was Robert Martin. And he was responsible for running this team. Now, with my assignment to the A team, as I was on the team as radio communications chief primarily, and that meant that I was responsible to make sure that we had good communications, to the support bases and everything. So from time to time, as Mr. Marasco's team needed some assistance, I was used by him to help send some of these coded messages and reports back for review. And other than that, I spent a lot of time at the forward observation base right at the border. And we ran nightly ambush patrols out of the forward observation base. We call it the FOB. And we had a high rate of casualties among our translators. And so we had to borrow one occasionally from a support team. And this agent's name was Tai Phoc Chuen. And he would assist us, and I ran ambush patrols with him. And we would eventually learn that he was a double agent spy that had infiltrated Special Forces intelligence operations from the support team base. And of course, now he was on the A team working with us. And I had a personal experience with him during an encounter with the Viet Cong. We had reports of an enemy troop movement in our sector, in our area of operation. So myself and Agent Chuen and 9 civilian troops had set up an ambush this particular evening looking for them. And sure enough, they came through the area and we initiated contact with them. And they withdrew, into a tree line. And of course, this is in the dark of night. But young and foolish as I was, it didn't seem well that they should be escaping, And I tried to call back to the FOB for mortar support so that they could lobby mortar rounds on the retreating enemy. But I couldn't raise it. All I could get on the radio was dead air. It was very peculiar, But in the flash of the moment, you make those decisions. So we pursued the Viet Cong to the tree line. And we stopped short of going in, and Agent Chuen was on my left, and the other troops were on my right. And as we approached the tree line and we were firing into it, and I noticed that Agent Chuen was not firing his weapon, but he was fiddling with it as though something had gone wrong with it. And you know yourself, the M16 has been known to, jam and misfire and all sorts of things occasionally. But as we were doing that, then we stopped, and they opened up on us from within the tree line, and we were greatly outnumbered. So we had no option but to escape and evade to a safer area. And fortunately, the trooper on duty at the B team and a fellow Special Forces sergeant named Adolf Mesa, he could see the tracer fire taking place in the exchange of fire, and he couldn't raise me on the radio, and he thought perhaps that I was dead or injured. So he made a command decision just to start firing mortar rounds. And so as we were escaping and they were firing at us, he began firing at them, and he did an excellent job. He took out that tree line, you know, in a big way. So we escaped unharmed and made our way back to the FOB the next morning, where after we investigated, we discovered that the radio dial, the frequency, had been changed to a different frequency. That is what prevented any contact for support. And it was a bit suspicious, but there was no real explanation about it. And I talked to Agent Chuyen about his M16 misfiring, and he explained that he had a problem with it, and it seemed proper. You know, there was no reason to suspect at that moment that he was a double agent. So we just dismissed it and went on about our business. And then sometime shortly after that, a photo was discovered by another intel operation inside Cambodia that showed Agent Chuyen meeting with high-level Viet Cong and North Vietnamese officials. And so that was the beginning of identifying him as a double agent. Our own indigenous agents that we worked with from the A team also began to complain about Agent Chuyen, saying that he was making too many inquiries about the camp personnel and things of that nature and military operations. And so our own intelligence began to dry up. And from that point forward, when it was identified or confirmed that he was a double agent, then Captain Marasco and others with Project Gamma made arrangements to have the agent arrested and interrogated.
There was always a problem with double agents and triple agents even. And like we said a while ago, the same people that did your laundry in the daytime would mark where the last night's mortar hit. Absolutely. So they could adjust the mortars and rockets to hit better targets and all.
Absolutely.
But the personnel were the worst problem because, like you've explained, you take them at their word for certain things, and there has to be some interdiction of facts to refute what he's saying, or you know after a while, because they do strange things, and if you're not alert and if you're not on the ball, you'll overlook them a lot of times because everybody becomes complacent. Absolutely. And you wanted them to be your friend, and friendship don't necessarily work anymore.
No,
it's good to have them when they're on the right side, but when they don't know which side they're on, it makes it very difficult.
Yeah.
So did you get orders to eliminate this man?
Well, not me personally, of course. My involvement with it was pretty much over at this point. But Captain Marasco and a couple of the Project Gamma officers met with CIA agents in Saigon asking what can we do about this? And it was a dilemma because if he was arrested and jailed, there was a fear of him being set loose by others in the organization of things. And letting him go scot-free, of course, put Americans and our counterparts at risk too, based on what he knew and things of that nature. So according to Captain Marasco and those other officers in Project Gamma, the CIA basically told them to eliminate the man. With extreme prejudice,
absolutely,
actually. And that's where that term we've heard so many times in movies and things, that's where it originated, I understand.
Did you have any parallel contact or working together with the Phoenix program?
Not directly, no.
Yeah.
No.
Because I know they were very active, especially in our Corps.
Yes.
Because there were so many villagers and
right.
chiefs of the villages and whatnot, and they had to be taken out with a crazy idea that this is somehow going to make the people love us when we get rid of their leader.
Yeah.
And another one of those decisions that makes no sense whatsoever.
We weren't assassins. Project Gamma, the goal was to monitor, the activity and the build-up, so that we would not be taken by surprise or anything. And just for the record, too, it's a little-known fact, but Captain Marasco's espionage work in Cambodia really contributed a lot to the invasion of Cambodia.
But we
in
weren't in
1970.
Cambodia, Terry.
Sir?
We weren't in Cambodia.
Oh, well, that's what I heard. Yeah, I heard somebody
Yeah, I
say
heard
that.
that too,
Yeah,
yeah.
I heard someone say that. But you know, and I understand that the records on Project Gamma are still sealed today, that they have never been released, which is a mystery. I mean, most of it's known, most of it can be researched, but I understand that the official records have never been released.
Well, there's always in intel, there's what you see and then there's what you don't see.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
making assumptions on questionable intel gets you in trouble a lot of times.
That's true.
But sometimes it saves your life, too.
Absolutely.
I mean, there were so many instances of interrogating a Viet Cong, and the end result was you'd find a cache of weapons out somewhere with thousands of tons of rice. And it was just by accident that you found out that information. And in another situation, you could pound and beat on them all day and they'd never tell you anything.
Yeah.
And so that just added to the mystique of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
For the record, it was not an experience or a police action, it was a war.
It was a war. When bullets are being exchanged, you know it's a war. A politician may call it a police action and water it down, but when people are shooting at you, Michael, it's a war.
I always
You're right.
said when mothers and fathers cry and men and women lay down to die, it's a war. And it's taken them 20 years to change it from what they call the experience
Yeah.
to a war. They finally admitted that, hey, it was a war. And even today, they refuse to call it a war.
Yeah.
And we are at war. It's a different kind of war, but yet, do you see the correlation between Vietnam and, say, the Middle East?
Yes, I can see some correlation there, yeah. I'm very troubled by what we're seeing in the Middle East and with how our politicians are handling things. Now, I don't mean to get political here on your show, but yeah, I'm personally troubled by things that I see, yeah. I think there's of course, I'm not privy to all the facts sitting here. There are things that you would not know unless you were sitting in the seats of government and have those things accessible to you. But from what I know and from what I've seen personally, and you know, I spend a lot of time in the Middle East now, there's a lot that needs to be corrected. There's a lot wrong with our foreign policy that I think is harming our own nation, and these things need to be corrected.
Well, do you think they will be? I mean, the mindset of the American people now is, I don't want anything to do with war, but I don't want you to blow me up.
Yeah.
I don't understand the concept.
Well, that's going to come to a head eventually, you know. But under the present guidelines that I see, I don't see any hope of real change. I'm not seeing or hearing it from any of our current political candidates as well either. It seems to be a status quo, you know, moving along like it is. And it doesn't seem to matter whether you are a Democrat or a Republican. They speak differently, but when they get in the office, they vote the same.
Right.
You know, that's the way it appears to me anyway. And
Well,
that's
I
very
think
disturbing.
that has generated the anger in the American people.
That's a big part of it.
People
Yes.
want change, but they're not willing to stand up and vote for it.
Right.
So what are you doing in the Middle East these days?
Well, of course, you know that I'm a Christian missionary today, and we've established some Christian works in the Middle East. We're primarily working in Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which many will know is the West Bank. And we're living...
Who originally was in control of Jerusalem? Originally, when the earth was just fresh?
Well, whenever the city of Jerusalem existed before the Hebrew people, is the way I understand the history. But King David is the one who is recognized, you know, as having set up the throne there in Jerusalem. Right. And
well, why did the Palestinians want it so badly?
Well, Michael, let me tell you, their history is aligned with the Jewish people. Now, you're opening a subject here that is very deep, but it's a very important one. I believe it even comes back to our foreign policy today. The Jewish people are descendants of the man Israel. It has been wrongly thought that Palestinians are descendants from another lineage of Abraham through Ishmael. Modern DNA testing proves that the majority of Palestinians' gene pool is an exact match with the Jewish people, with the exception of a little mix of Arab genes, which would happen through intermarriage, of course. So basically what science has proven is that the majority of Palestinian people are as much Hebraic as a Jewish person is. Now, this is a message that we're also presenting in the Middle East today. It's a part of course, our primary goal is to lift up Christ, the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it's reconciliation of peoples through Christ.
Well, do you try to change the mind of these people from their set ways for thousands of years and introduce Jesus into their way of life and their thought process? I mean, do you try to do that?
Well, you know yourself that you can't change anyone's thinking. It has to come from heaven above through the Holy Spirit of God working in people to effect that kind of change. But we proclaim this change. We proclaim Jesus Christ as King of Kings and Lord of Lords over Jews and Palestinians.
Are there a lot of Christians in the Middle East today?
In the Middle East, there's several hundred thousand. Now, in Israel itself, there's a limited number. You may have in the West Bank, which is thought to be predominantly Islamic, and it is, but there's probably maybe 50 to 60,000 Christians there today.
Now, is there persecution of these Christians?
Not in Israel and Palestine. Now, you're getting the persecution of Christians in other parts of the Middle East through ISIS, which, by the way, must be dealt with.
Yeah.
But in Israel and Palestine itself, no. As far as the Palestinians' platform is, there's a difference, and sometimes there might be an argument. But today there's a mutual respect between the Muslim and the Christian because they're all Palestinians. And they're seeking their own freedom today, so they aren't letting these religious issues be the problem.
So what do they think about you?
Well, they either love us or hate us. It's one or the other. There's no middle ground. Yeah. We have enjoyed much, much favor with the Palestinian people to the point of being recognized and accepted in high places and in the lowest of refugee camps. So we contribute that to the power of God.
But do some of the people see you as a interloper or somebody that,
sure,
that you're not supposed to be here and we don't want to hear your message?
Of course.
Are you in any danger?
Well, there's always that potential. Now, in the beginning, back 20 plus years ago, we had all kinds of problems. We had calls for my personal death. We had attempts made on our lives, but the police, the Palestinian police, were good, to step in and interfere. We also garnered the support, without seeking it, but of Suha Arafat, who was the first Palestinian First Lady, the wife of Yasser Arafat. And her Christian background, she was interested in what we were doing in bringing this message in a public forum, which had never been done before this way there. And so she lent her moral support to what we were doing because of her Christian background. And that, in turn, opened up other doors.
So you don't need your M16 over there?
Well, we wouldn't be permitted to carry one anyway. It's all a matter of faith there.
Yeah. Well, Terry, is there anything you'd like to add to the program today? We've covered a lot of subjects, and I hope the audience has learned some things, and I know I have. And is there anything that we haven't talked about that we really need to?
Well, I would just like to just briefly put a cap on the Project Gamma affair we were talking about. It's better known as the Green Beret affair. Anyone can research that. But murder charges were actually filed against Captain Marasco and the other officers who plotted with him about the assassination of the double agent. They were actually left out to be hung. The CIA denied any complicity or any knowledge about it whatsoever. And that speaks volumes. You know, that's a shame that that happened. President Nixon got involved and ordered the charges dropped for the sake of national security. But careers were ruined because of that. They were forced to retire. Others like myself, we were just reassigned to, you know, duty stations and forgotten about. And so that's the cap off that story. But I also want to say, Michael, that as far as Vietnam is concerned and the sacrifices and all the American blood that was shed there, today I still meet people who maybe don't understand and appreciate that every American life that was sacrificed there was not in vain. I've said this many, many times. Even though things didn't eventually turn out the way that, you know, that we had hoped that it would, that Vietnam failed after we left under an honorable circumstance, many people felt like that the lives were just all wasted. But there's not an American soldier in any war who has ever died in defense of the oppressed who died in vain. Yeah. And I would just like for everybody to take that.
Well, having been back to Vietnam since the war ended, they do have a sense of freedom now that they didn't have before. Saigon has turned into a retail center. They have casinos and high-rises, and you wouldn't know it if you go back today because the money that's come into the country, they're building up and they're opening factories. And the people, although it's a communist country and you're still liable to be stopped by the police and all this and questioned, these things do happen, but for the most part, the people are left alone. All they want is their bowl of rice 3 times a day or twice a day. And they're essentially happy people. Of course, there's always dissent, no matter what type of government you have. But I have watched it grow from a dirty 2-lane road to a major highway, 6 lanes with 30-foot dividers filled with tropical flowers. And I've seen that transition firsthand, and I felt the transition. And when I go back, I look for the war where I knew things happened and I can't find them. I can feel them, but I can't find them. But Vietnam veterans today can hold their head up.
Yes.
They have nothing to be ashamed of. They have nothing to apologize to anyone for because they did what Americans should do, and that's obey your country's orders, even though we sometimes don't agree with them.
Right.
But I agree with you that we made a difference, and if anybody says we didn't make a difference, then they should come and talk to me.
That's right.
Because I've seen the end result, and it looks pretty promising. And in fact, I look for us to have a Navy base at Cameron Bay before long, and they're working on it. That would be good. Yeah.
It would.
Well, we're going to wrap it up for today, and I appreciate all the subjects we've covered, Terry. And I'm always awed in the presence of a movie star anyway.
That's a mutual. That's a mutual.
We're going to go, I don't even remember that so long ago. But I thank you for coming on and sharing your ideas and thoughts with us. And as the world situation changes, maybe we'll have you back sometime and further discuss it.
Well, I appreciate it, Michael. Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it, man. God bless you.
Me too. God bless you.